situation is dire, and far more dire than I think we would have believed possible when this conference was set. When the conference was set, I was excited to speak about the Sustainable Development Goals and the sustainability challenge, but I did not dream that we would be in the midst of a horrific war in Europe and an extraordinary danger, the largest war in Europe since World War II, and with the risks of confrontation between nuclear powers. This is a very frightening time. I was just looking at the doomsday clock of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, which was established after the horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to give warning to the world about the dangers of a nuclear war. And we are, as you know, according to the doomsday clock, the closest to midnight in the history of the post-World War II period. And that clock puts us at 100 seconds to midnight, less than 2 minutes. But I dare say that the bulletin will almost surely move the hands of the clock even closer to midnight with the events of recent days. The overwhelming fact of our time is the failure of global cooperation. In fact, we are reverting to a period of big power, conflict, of alliances that are not creating stability in the world, but are creating more and more danger of outright war and of outright world war even, which in a nuclear age could be the end of everything. And the cascade of failures to cooperate on the most basic points of common interest is the shocking fact of our time. I want to discuss briefly 6 areas of global failure of cooperation, all of them a threat to survival on this planet, all of them a mark of profound failure of diplomacy, all of them a signal to us that we must push our governments to sanity. All governments. This isn't just one or another. This is a view of the world that is increasingly threatening our survival because our governments are not working effectively together and are not living according to the goals and the standards that we have set for decency and for peace in the UN system. I'll start with Ukraine. Of course, a tragedy, a catastrophe, a drama as we speak, with the major civilian urban centers being shelled, with already 1 million refugees on the move. And there is no way to reduce the horrors that Russia has unleashed in recent days or to minimize those horrors. But we also need to understand the background of this conflict and how we went from a period 30 years ago where there was a new cooperation, an end of a Cold War that had repeatedly threatened the world, to what seemed like an open invitation for creating a new global security structure that could create an era of peace. I was involved with the Soviet Union in its final years, working with the economic team of Mikhail Gorbachev. I was involved with the new government of Boris Yeltsin in the newly independent Russia in 1992. I advised briefly President Kuchma of Ukraine in 1993 and 1994. So I remember personally that this was a period in which peace could have been created for generations to come. What happened? Well, I put principal responsibility of failure on the United States. The United States did not live up to the possibilities of that time. The Soviet Union was in economic collapse. Russia, as a newly independent state, and the other 14 newly independent states of the former Soviet Union were in economic crisis. But when help was needed from the outside, sympathy, empathy, financial assistance, it was not forthcoming from the United States or from US allies. The crisis in Russia economically was very deep. The society was deeply dislocated. It's at times like that, with such dislocation, that help and global cooperation is so essential to demonstrate that there is a way forward of cooperation and of mutual understanding. But I'm afraid that the US government at the time viewed the period as a victory, as a US victory where many in the United States government and foreign policy establishment believed that now was the time that the US could do what it wants because Russia was too weak to oppose the United States. One of the things that the US did, contrary to its promise to the Soviet Union made in 1990, was to expand the NATO military alliance eastward. And if you have doubts about whether such promises were made, careful historians have demonstrated unequivocally that the United States, Germany, and others promised to the Soviet Union leadership that with the unification of Germany, there would be no NATO expansion to the east. And they lied, they cheated. By the mid-1990s, President Clinton began to expand the US military alliance into Central and Eastern Europe. Then President Bush came into office and extended the alliance into the Baltic states. Bush also unilaterally withdrew from the anti-ballistic missile treaty in 2002 to Russia's great consternation. NATO bombed a Russian ally in Europe in 1999, bombing Serbia, and showing that NATO was going to deploy its power without consultation with Russia and potentially as a direct threat to Russia. Then came the Afghan invasion by the United States in 2001, the Iraq War by the United States in 2003, the invitation to Ukraine and Georgia to join NATO over vociferous Russian objections in 2008, the US attempt to overthrow Bashar al-Assad in Syria in 2011, the NATO bombing of Libya in 2011, and the US assistance to overthrow a pro-Russian government in Ukraine in 2014. I mention all of this because all of these steps by the United States, in my opinion, were provocative. They gave Putin the notion that NATO would encircle Russia step by step. And in the past year, Putin made demands that NATO not expand into Ukraine. The United States ignored those demands. It said that Ukraine has the choice to join NATO, which translated means the US has the right to expand into Ukraine, because that's what it means. It means that a US military alliance could expand right up against Russia's border. So while I don't mean in any way to exculpate or exonerate Putin and Russia for crimes against humanity being committed in Ukraine, I do mean to say that there are antecedent causes that contributed to the current disaster. And one of those causes of great importance was the profound arrogance of the United States in not listening to the security concerns of the Soviet Union and of Russia, and mocking and ignoring those security concerns for 30 years, in fact, until now. And now we are paying a dreadful price, but it's the Ukrainian people who are paying this dreadful price. And we are not out of escalation. We are not out of danger of direct confrontation. And I put the failure of diplomacy of the United States as a major part of this current crisis. It's not popular to say. It is not remembered in the United States. It's not carried by the mainstream media, but there is some important US responsibility in this disaster.